Today we're in John's Gospel, John chapter 15. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. A greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Well, this year we've been looking at John's Gospel, and one of the unique things about John's Gospel is the record of Jesus' teachings, where he makes these definitive claims about who he is. And so this week we're looking at this claim that we heard in the reading of I am the vine. And we're trying to get a sense of how these definitive claims from Jesus about his identity link with one of the other major themes throughout John's Gospel, this idea of life. And particularly, Jesus' claim in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. You see, as we've been thinking about life, we've been realizing that life is quite complex, and to live a full and abundant life realizes that a number of various aspects need to be satisfied for us to feel fulfilled. And so we've been looking at the idea of strength and freedom, the necessity for hope and meaning and purpose. And each week we've been realizing that there are tangible physical things that often meet these needs. Relationships, work, our material possessions, our interests, all of these things often satisfy these needs within us that leave us feeling and identifying that we feel fulfilled with life. This week we're thinking about the idea of being secure. And for generations, Australia has been known as the lucky country. And no doubt that is a description because of the physical security that most of us take for granted. Free from oppressive governments or corrupt and abusive situations at large. On a whole, Australia is secure not just physically, but for many, they have relational security with good family and friend networks. And there's also, particularly over the last few generations, been a great financial security that has opened up a whole range of opportunities. Many of the things that provide this security are both our material possessions, our net worth, you might say, and our occupations, our jobs, our careers that are not only a source of income, but also give us some validation that we are making a meaningful contribution to those around. And so I think all of us can identify at least periods in life where we felt secure, where we had money in the bank and we had some security about the outlook for the future. And that really opens up a whole range of possibilities for life, doesn't it? We start making plans about what we might do with our time, or areas that we'd like to learn or develop or further express ourselves. And no doubt one of the most popular books that's hit the country in the last couple of years, and Helena and I have read it ourselves, that The Barefoot Investor sort of taps into this desire and recognition that being secure is a good thing. Now, most people, when they sort of see this book, think that it's a sort of a wealth creation book, but really under the surface, it's a book about being secure, to be rich, but to be comfortable. He talks about an ideology that's not driven by greed, but a desire to live a stress-free life. He's certainly not selling a perfect life, that you're going to be a multi-billionaire, but sort of this picture of security where you can support you and your family, where you can take responsibility for your decisions, and that you can manage your finances so that all the things that you value as priorities can be satisfied. And I think the success of this book is that it taps into the underlying great Australian dream that we can be in control, that we deserve to be comfortable, and that ultimately the purpose of life is to be happy. Most of us desire these things, if not thinking that we deserve them. Over the last couple of weeks in particular, we realise and have been confronted by how much security we've just taken for granted. In this part, actually, in John's Gospel, those who have been listening to Jesus' teaching and following him, those who had given up everything else that had been their security, their work, their family relationships, their social status, are now starting to be troubled. We saw at the start of chapter 14 that as Jesus has been speaking about his departure, predicting his impending death, and preparing the disciples for the time when he wouldn't be with them, that they're starting to feel insecure. And so we see that Jesus here is speaking to close friends who are filled with fear, some doubts, and probably some level of anxiety. And they're probably also asking themselves, have they backed the wrong horse here with Jesus? Should they really have given everything up for him? And so these concerns that were probably in the background of the disciples whom Jesus is speaking to, no doubt resonate with the concerns that loom large over our society. In the space of a few weeks, and in some areas of the world, a few months, our physical, relational, and financial security has become extremely vulnerable. The things that we've taken for granted have been exposed. And so I wonder, in the midst of all this, what's making you feel safe? Maybe as you think about your physical security, you're secure in the fact that you're healthy, that you're fit. And maybe you're taking comfort in the demographic that you are and the way that that is generally responding to the virus. What about financial vulnerability? Are you trusting and finding security in the reputation that you have within your industry, your skill set, or just your rugged tenacity that whatever happens, you'll survive? You see, globally, There's a unique moment in history where we're all exposed to some level of our vulnerability because of the same issue, this global pandemic. But the interesting thing that hasn't changed in the last few months, which is just as much of a problem, is the mortality rate. Across time, that's never shifted from 100%. All who have lived have died. And so what's Jesus' words here going to speak to us in a time where there is fear, where we have doubts, and there's a great sense of insecurity about the future? Well, throughout John chapter 15, and in fact through John's Gospel altogether, Jesus speaks constantly about his relationship and the Father. And he shows that the relationship that he has with God the Father is the paradigm by which he's wanting to establish relationships with people on earth as they hear his call to follow him and they trust him. And so in John chapter 15, there's the image of the Father, the Son, and the followers. And that sort of resonates with this metaphor of the gardener, the vine, and the branches. What we see here in Jesus' teaching is that relationships matter to God. A relationship is what Jesus is inviting those who hear his words to. Like any relationship, deep involvement is necessary. You see, whether it's caring for others or supporting them, expressing love often comes through correcting, guiding, and directing. I live in Haberfield, and it's often known as one of the garden suburbs. Each year there's a Best Garden Award, and there's sort of the usual suspects. And you can tell a good garden when you walk past. Firstly, because it's usually very pristinely manicured, everything is sort of nicely working together. But the other unique feature about a good garden is that you often see someone gardening in it. You see, a good garden is a result of a gardener who loves its garden and is keenly aware to get involved at the times when things need to be planted, when things need to be pulled out, when the trimming needs to be done, when the fertilizer needs to be given. And so this is the kind of image that Jesus is expressing about the intent of God and his desire for this kind of involved relationship with humanity. You see, God sees what a healthy human looks like. And when he sees something that's good being demonstrated in the life of an individual, like a caring gardener, he prunes it so that growth can multiply. And when he sees something that's decaying and dying, well, he chops it off. He realizes there's no way of turning things around. And Jesus is saying that the way to thrive in life, to fully flourish, requires being connected to the source of life. And the way that we're connected is this idea in chapter 15, verse 5, of abiding and remaining in him. You see, no branch has life in and of itself. It's utterly dependent on the vine. But the vine and the branches, they're one entity, aren't they? They're both living and producing as one organism. The branches derive their life from the vine, and the vine produces its fruit through the branch. And so this is the kind of connection that Jesus is offering those who want to have a relationship with him. And so what that sort of looks like in times like this is a picture of calmness in the face of uncertainty. It's a sense of peace in the midst of real adversity. Jesus goes on in verse 7, "If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." Now this idea of the vine being fruitful is showing the kind of change that Jesus is expecting in the lives of those who trust him. So verse 10 talks about obedience to his commands. Verse 11 talks about sharing in the experience of his joy. Verse 12 talks about loving one another, and verse 16 and later in the chapter, verse 27 talks about being the witness, a witness to the world, is only going to result when we remain dependent on the source of life. I've seen a few Christmas trees in the gutter recently, and last Christmas was the first time, I kept telling the kids, was that we had a living Christmas tree. Now it's the tree on the right there, the frangipani. You see, historically we get a tree, a beautiful pine tree that smells so amazing in the house, but it's been cut off from the source of its life. Although it looks so green and it smells so alive, it's actually dead. Whereas this year we had this sort of funny looking frangipani branch that we'd stuck into a pot, but the amazing thing about it was that it started to flower because it was actually coming to life. They're an amazing tree. The kind of picture that Jesus is talking about. You see, sometimes we look like that pine Christmas tree. We think we look like we've got it all together. But actually we're disconnected from the source of life, and ultimately we'll be like that browning tree in the gutter or in the rubbish bin. The kind of life that Jesus is offering is being repotted and planted so that we can flower and flourish when we are connected to him, the source of life. You see, friends, as we all collectively live in the face of insecurity with this global pandemic, Jesus gives us a new destination to cast our eyes on. He's saying that the goal that we should aim towards is true life. So yes, a priority for us is about preserving life, flattening the curve, absolutely, making wise decisions, loving each other. But the ultimate goal is that Jesus is saying, actually, I've dealt with that bigger problem. That mortality rate, that 100% humans who are born, who die. Well, I'm actually creating a new life, a life after death. And that's actually the thing you should be most prioritizing. That's the thing that you should be most concerned about. And so once you make Jesus this priority, that when you come to him and trust yourself into his promises, as you remain in him, you will then bear fruit. And bearing fruit, he says, is loving one another. By remaining in the source of life, we actually have the nutrients to be able to love people as they need to. We will still have fears, we will still have our own doubts. These are normal and expected. But Jesus offers us peace in the face of a pandemic. And so if this goal that we should be looking towards is eternal life, then the priority of our heart is to be dependent, to abide in the source of life, to remain in Jesus' promises, to be in communion, talking with the one whom we're in relationship with. You see, our fruitfulness will flow from our connectedness to Jesus. Our continued dependence on the vine will produce fruit. So the goal that Jesus gives us in the face of a pandemic is that of life beyond death. And the kind of heart that he is wanting to be shaping in us is one of utter dependence on him, the one who will provide ultimate security. And that when we have that kind of heart inclination of full dependence on him, we will then become fruitful in the way that we live. One way that is clear in the passage about how that manifests is in the way that we pray. We show our dependence on God when we talk to Him, when we bring our concerns to Him as requests, when we submit our plans to His will. Friends, I think that as we're washing our hands for 20, 30 seconds to get rid of all those bugs, what a great opportunity for us to be remembering and praying about the cleansing that Jesus has provided, and that we might be useful and fruitful with these clean hands. Jesus calls His people to love one another as they have been loved. Fruitfulness is seen in our actions, most specifically at this time. You see, friends, the church isn't shutting down. The church will never close. We've simply moved our public gatherings online as an expression of love, and we will have a whole new range of expressions of love according to need. There are particular people who are going to need costly love that's going to cost us to give in the weeks, months, and even years ahead. There are going to be people who lose their job. There are going to be people who lose their loved ones. There are going to be people who lose their own life. What does it look like for us to love others in the midst of that? Walking alongside. Well, the kind of love that Jesus has shown us is a love that was deeply costly. He gave Himself fully, dying for our sin so that we can be forgiven. What might it look like for us to forgo some of our paycheck, to give up some of our leisure, even when we aren't forced to shut down? What would it look like to invite someone who's doing it tough to come and live with us? What would it look like for us to share the burden in this intense time in those industries where skills are limited but essential to the survival of many? Friends, in this time of insecurity, Jesus offers security of life beyond death. Let's have a dependent heart, remain in Him, and be fruitful as you pray to Him and love others.